In this video, which will be the first one of a series dedicated to just that topic, we will talk about the role of fingers in handstands. What's up guys, this is Vincent from the Handstand Academy, and today we're gonna zoom on what the fingers are supposed to be doing when you are upside down. Anyone who has been practicing handstands for a few weeks, or who has been binge watching YouTube and all tutorials out there to find out more about handstands knows that there is something to be done with your fingers. However, it's a bit more complicated than that. Fingers come into play at a very specific moment of your handstand. They're useless at first as you kick up into your handstand, and they will only work under very specific conditions. And if you don't meet those, you will not be able to hold a handstand, no matter how well you are using your fingers. In this video series, we're gonna talk about the role of finger pushing in handstands, how to properly do it, the mistakes to avoid when you are practicing your finger control upside down, as well as all the prerequisites you wanna have first before you even start bothering about fingers. When it comes to finger control, there's a lot that our feet can teach us. And in this first video, we're going to talk about the 5 lessons that our feet can teach us when it comes to holding ourselves upside down and using our fingers properly. To understand what the fingers are supposed to be doing upside down, you have to really have ingrained and digested the mechanics of a handstand. A handstand, and you will have heard me say that before in many other videos, is not a resting position upside down. This is not something that you find magically after a few thousand reps and sets against the wall, and suddenly you don't have to fight for your handstand anymore. As I explained within the Handstand Academy, a handstand is much more of a fall forward that you are balancing. It's a position which is unstable by nature, and that you're saving through 2 different kinds of movements. First, the micro-correcting tools. These are small, subtle movements that you perform while upside down and which won't change the shape that you have upside down. And fingers, for that matter, are the quintessential micro-correcting tool. They allow you to stay in the same shape and to float for longer and longer durations as you become more proficient at using them. Therefore, they allow you to hold the same shape without changing anything to that shape, which is extremely important to understand, because the moment you start changing a leg position, a hip position, the shoulder angle, it will generate a lot of movement back and forth in your handstand and may force you out of balance. It's going to be much harder to rebalance a handstand in which you're changing shapes, and that's why at a later stage of your development, when you work on transitions going from a straight handstand to a straddle to a tuck, you will find that this is much harder than holding those shapes separately, simply because while upside down, you are changing what happens in your structure. And so the second set of movements that we have to hold ourselves upside down is what I call the macro-correcting tools. These are wider movements, usually a bit more abrupt, a bit more aggressive, and those will change the way your body looks upside down, the exact shape that you have. It may be, as we were saying before, a hip extending or flexing, a knee extending or flexing, shoulders extending or flexing, the pelvis tilting forward or backwards, the spine extending or flexing, and many other different elements. And those macro-correcting tools have much more of a resonance in your body, much more of an echo. So yes, they allow you to stay in balance, and they will need to be used in different scenarios from the macro-correcting tools. They will have much more of an impact, much more of an echo, and therefore will need you to compensate for that. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm saying that both micro and macro correcting tools are relevant to your handstand journey, but they will be relevant at different stages of your journey. And therefore, the priority with which you want to learn them, the order in which you want to learn them, is crucial. And because finger control leads to more subtle, nuanced, and stable corrections, you want to emphasize those first. Because although it's harder to feel what the fingers are supposed to be doing, it's much easier to control the consequences of using them to control and hold our handstand. And so today, I want you to really grasp that concept. So we're gonna stand up together and stay with the feet flat on the ground. From there, we're gonna go on our tippy toes, lift the heels of the feet, squeeze the feet together if it makes you a bit more stable. Close your eyes and feel what your toes are doing. Bring your attention to what your toes are naturally performing to hold you in that position. From there, you're gonna lean your head forward ever so slightly and feel the reaction that happens in your toes. You may feel that your toes are starting to fight harder and harder to prevent you from actually falling forward as the head leans more and more. And what happens here in your feet with your toes is exactly what will happen in your fingers in a handstand. And this has a few implications. First, it teaches us that the fingers are not passive upside down. In this position, standing up on our toes, we are in essence falling forward, and we can feel that the toes are fighting harder if we bring the head a bit further forward and relaxing a bit as we get back closer to a natural resting position. The fingers will be squeezing the floor more or less intensely depending on the structure you have upside down. And they will allow you, if you press them properly, if you use them properly, to go back to more of a resting quote-unquote position, one better said that you don't have to fight as much for. Second lesson, we also realize that there's only so much those toes can fight for balance. If you keep leaning forward with your head, at some point your toes won't be strong enough if you change nothing else to your shape to save you from falling forward, even if you're Michael Jackson. And therefore you just take a step out of that. And that step that you take here is exactly the step you will take with your hand when you bail out of a handstand that you cannot control with your fingers upside down. So the fingers will be useful to prevent us from falling forward, but there is only so much they can do, and if the shape is not, as I like to call it, viable anymore, they won't be of any use, and you will have to bail out of that. Third lesson, obvious and yet not so obvious. Your fingers are useless unless you are in position. If you bring your heels back down from that standing up position, you feel that your toes don't have to be clenching, they don't have to be squeezing against the floor, because you're not falling forward. And the same applies to your fingers. They don't need to be active unless you already are in the proper position that we are after in handstands. Therefore, there is such a thing as timing when it comes to fingers. If you use them too soon, they will actually work against you and hinder your attempt at holding a handstand. And feeling that timing is the purpose of many different drills we can go through together, and that we will introduce in different future videos, as well as in the classes and within the Handstand Academy. Fourth lesson, notice that if you were to push too hard on those toes, as hard as you can, eventually you will start moving backwards and lose that position. Your heels will fall back on the floor because you would have driven yourself back. And this means that when it comes to our handstands, you have to understand that pushing on the floor is not just about pushing as hard as you can for as long as you can against that floor to hold a handstand. At some point, you are going to need to relax your fingers, because if you kept pushing, your shoulders would move out of alignment and you would lose your handstand. Pushing for too long and too intensely makes you lose what we have defined as being the first stack. And if you haven't checked that video just yet, I invite you to watch it now and understand exactly what we are after when it comes to placing the shoulders over the hands. So finger pushing is actually more of a tango between relaxation and tension that allows us to stay in that falling forward position with as little effort as possible. And for this tango to happen, you need to know and to train when to start pushing, when to stop pushing, and how intensely you should push at different stages of your kick-up. Final lesson, notice that it's much easier to hold this if nothing else is moving in your body. If your body is like a stick completely still, then your toes have much more room to perform the correction. But if your hips start flexing and extending, if your knees start flexing and extending, as you're trying to do that, your life becomes much more complicated when it comes to holding the balance. And this brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, the macro tools of correction. Understand that flexing that hip and bending that knee will be the equivalent of moving the hips and moving the shoulders when you are on your hands. And you want to notice already here how disruptive this is to your balance, how disruptive this is to what your fingers are supposed to be doing. And this is why in my method, I advise people to bring their attention first on what the fingers are supposed to be doing, to bring their attention first on the macro correction tool that the fingers are, until they can already hold themselves upside down for 5 to 10 seconds more or less consistently, but before they even bother training the macro correction tools. And by the way, we have quite a few tools of macro correction, and all of them don't suit everyone the same way. We intuitively have 1 or 2 tools of macro correction that we default to and that we want to assess first, to be able to maximize what our body naturally does, instead of just training them all and wasting time trying to do everything. If you want me to help you design a a weekly personalized training program, or if you want to have access to more of those tutorials and those videos to train by yourself at home, you can check out the Handstand Academy, in which you will find a library, my online weekly classes, as well as my online coaching if you are serious and dedicated to your handstand journey. And that's it for today. I wanted to keep that video quite short. We will continue this series talking about what the fingers are actually doing under circumstances we want to gather before even trying to push with our fingers, so that we are in the desired position for the fingers to be working properly, as well as the mistakes that I see every single beginner do when it comes to using the fingers. We will cover all that in future videos. Meanwhile, if you have any question, you know where to find me. Go in the comments and leave me a message. Finally, of course, if this was useful to you, this channel is just growing, it's just starting. Don't forget to subscribe and or hit the bell button. It helps this channel grow, and it helps me know that you are appreciating this kind of content, pushing me to create more and more to support you in your handstand journey.